Hello, hello, everyone. It's Friday afternoon where we spend our time with Thorn, Wea, Davis, and guests. Today, we're very happy to have Dana Walls back on the show with us. Dana is a longtime friend of both of us, longtime friend, and also a sign language interpreter. So I know Dana through interpreting, but I just heard the story, Dana, the other day about how you and Thorn met. So that was interesting. Just like happened to me. Yeah, they're
At
saying,
a bar. Yeah, at a bar.
yeah.
So I was just a little baby learner, and he was with the big deaf group that was meeting. I think you all had attended a lecture that evening, and then afterwards I went out for some drinks. And yeah, just a million years ago now, but what a gift.
Yeah, that was awesome. It's just funny because I know you through interpreting work. Like we literally worked together interpreting, and then I know Thorn through the deaf community, and then you know each other, and so it's just like this weird go around of friendship, you know?
The world is small. Yeah, absolutely. I think like-minded people just tend to find each other.
Yeah, that's true. So here today, we're going to start a possible series if Dana is willing to join us again. No pressure, Dana. We can do it alone as well. But there are 9 books in the Vedic Valens anthology, and there's a lot of contention over the translations. Now, we're not trying to have a fight, okay? This is scholarship, and it's more of a debate, if anything. But as sign language interpreters, we know that there are different interpretations for every text. I mean, Dana, would you agree that you and I would never interpret the same deaf person the same way? Or I mean, how similar,
Absolutely.
how different would they be?
Absolutely. I think it would depend on our lived experience. It would depend on the situation. I mean, it could be as simple as depending on how much coffee. Maybe one of us has a little more caffeine, the other one's feeling a little tired. It could depend on your personal mood that day. Maybe if you're not feeling like at your best, you might make some mistakes or stumble. What is the register we're trying to match? So there's all these factors, absolutely, that go into an individual's approach to interpreting, and it might even be the same sentence, the same person saying the same sentence several times. Maybe it's a catchphrase. You and I could interpret that in wildly different ways, and so I think that's part of the beauty of interpreting is it is so subjective.
So, Thorne, do you notice that? How do you think about that fact that two different interpreters would interpret the same text differently? How do you feel okay trusting your interpreters if they would be different? Everyone's saying, I think it's cool. I don't need there to be the same exact equivalent translation. It's cool because there's a difference that is complex and is unique. How each person would express their interpretation, and both can add benefit to those perspectives. So there's a lot of expansion that can happen in that space with how the information is translated and expressed and conveyed. So I'm not against it at all. I'm all for it. I'm all for it. Okay. So I have to go back to this point that we've made before on the show, but not everyone's seen that show. But okay, so let's take a text like the Star Spangled Banner. The Star Spangled Banner. That song. Okay. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light? Whatever. Okay, so how many interpretations of the Star Spangled Banner are in existence? Like how many do you think? Oh, more than 100. Thorne
I
saying.
would I would agree with that. Yeah, I would
Yeah.
say yeah, 100 plus. Are they all good? No. But most of us hearing interpreters have been lucky enough to watch the deaf interpreters, for example, during the Super Bowl game. And we've seen some really talented interpretations of that frozen text that then we can able to incorporate into our interpretation.
Hey, what's
Um,
a frozen text? But okay, Thorne, and then we'll go back to that. Thorne. And also I want to add that from a deaf view, deaf interpreters and the deaf performers both, have stood on stage and signed that. And the only one negative about that is that there's not enough airtime, equal airtime, you know. So the hearing people, they stand and they talk and they sign, and there's performers who might sign that song, and then there's the deaf interpreter performer signing that song. And there's not an equivalency always in the history of the Super Bowl, forever in history, from the beginning. But you know, the first person who stood on stage and signed that music, I believe it was Marley Matlin, you know, Marley Matlin. So that was there's a singer who performed that song, and they required that they have Marley Matlin standing right next to them, actually, not to the side. And so that was a requirement. And after that, going forward, there's always the hearing performers there, and then the other deaf signer, interpreter, or performer is off to the side a little bit, always. And so it's not enough airtime on that interpreter. So that's been 5 years, especially the last 5 years, the deaf community has been trying to advocate and push forward for more equivalency to have equal airtime. So anyway, that's my perspective. But anyway, the point is with that signed expression of a star, the Star Spangled Banner, there's many, many translations and interpretations. All are not perfect. All are not wonderful. Some are really good. Some are, you know, not, they're okay, but there's a beauty in the differences. So we can learn from each one, and integrate all of those and really analyze how to, you know, take it with a grain of salt, that, as hearing people would say, the grain of salt, that there's a benefit there. There's room to improve. There's always room to grow and learn. So I encourage, I'm an advocate for that always. So back to the frozen text point. Go ahead, Dana.
Yeah, so frozen text is a text that never changes. It is always done the same. And I don't mean that your voice, your accent, or your emphasis can't change. The text itself never changes. So the Star Spangled Banner is a wonderful example of a frozen text. The Pledge of Allegiance is a frozen text. Certain poems. And again, people can emphasize different points of the sentence and the structure. You know, if you were doing maybe like a formal recitation of like Robert Frost, Nothing Gold Can Stay, one person might emphasize certain words or phrases, but the text itself, the words themselves never change over time.
So, okay, so I mean, another frozen text I love is the Lord's Prayer,
Yes,
the Serenity Prayer.
yes.
Like there's many prayers that are frozen text. You know, even okay, when you go to the post office and they say, "Do you have anything in your package that is frozen, liquid, fragile, perishable, whatever?" I don't know if you've heard
Frozen.
that. That is a
Yeah.
frozen text, and I
There's
hear
a
that at the
frozen
post
text.
office so often, and they have to say it exactly as such. Well, okay, so
Same with flight attendants, right?
oh
Sorry,
yeah,
not pilots, but flight attendants. Yeah,
oh yeah, when they do the like put your seatbelt on it and all that, that's a frozen text, right?
yeah.
Um, okay, so in some ways we could say that a critical edition of a book translation is a frozen text. Like the Vedius Valens anthology was frozen into a critical edition, which is it's one text that we're all working from the same text. I mean, do you guys agree that that's a frozen text or no? Dana's
Hmm.
saying it's ambivalent.
Well, number one, I am a novice with this particular work, so I defer to you two and your opinions and experiences with it. But I'm curious. I did a tiny bit of research about the philosopher, just in his life, and anyway, what is he the source material? This is
Yeah.
his writings.
Yeah, it's his writings. He was an
Okay,
astrologer who lived 2,000 years ago.
yeah, in like ancient Rome, right?
Ancient Greece, yeah.
Ancient Greece. Okay, thank you. Thank you for clarifying. Okay, sorry. Go on.
But I mean, the question is like the Odyssey, like the Iliad or the Odyssey, a frozen text. Thorn.
Thorn.
I would say that the very, very original writing of that of the Odyssey and the Iliad, that is a frozen text. But you have to understand that going back to the, reading it and all the translations, to their cultures and all the things have been translated, maybe their documentation is tweaked a little bit, because their language and their context and their accents and all of that and the expression of it, the cultural and the tone, but in the very original, that one is a frozen text. Okay, yeah, that's what I'll say.
This is Dana. I am inclined to agree. So the Odyssey obviously started as only oral storytelling. It precedes our knowledge of written language, or at least our historical documentation of. It's possible that they had written language, but that's been lost to time. And so when we start with an oral tradition and then that moves into the written word, yes, and I agree in that like each country that then heard the Odyssey maybe put down like a similar story, but like their marketplace was called something else, or their like sacred place was a spring or like a spring and not a tree. Um, Sorry, I did have a thought and I wanted to come back. But like over time too, we've seen people do, as Andy was saying, critical translations of the Odyssey and say like, oh, instead of the wine dark sea, what if instead what they meant was da da da. Sorry, my point is the Bible is not a frozen text. There was one edition of the Bible, and then we have the King James Version, and that's the most popular one. That's the one that has all the phrases that we think of as either being coined by Shakespeare or we know they come from that particular version of the Bible. But the Bible itself is not frozen text, even though it's 2,000 years old. So I think that's interesting too.
So, okay, so this is interesting because we can see for sure from what you guys are saying that no translation can ever be a frozen text because it's not the original sourced text, right? So maybe the Greek papyrus of Vedic Valens was frozen. Like we're all working from the same Greek papyrus situation. But
Mhm.
even there's some changes in the critical editions and all these things. And so it's like anytime the text or the source text is changing at all, it's not frozen, right? But if two translators were working from the exact same text, maybe we could call it frozen. Okay, third. That reminds me of a similar concept of if the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yes.
um that's that was the very original text, uh the source text, like that is not translated, there's nothing translated, there's something frozen there. But if you have to look at who was the philosopher, who was the scholar, who was who was the translator and all these things, you have to learn from that and then say, they made their own translation or adaptation. So I would say that there is a way that the transference that occurs, that at the very original text that is frozen.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And that's interesting because there was a Council of Nicene, I want to say in about 18, I think it was 1800 AD, and it was a series of priests who literally got together and built the Bible that would become what is now the modern Bible and all of its various versions. But they were the ones who picked and chose, like the Gospel of Magdalene out, the Gospel of Judas out, this part in. And it was a group of white cis men making these decisions. And again, as Thorne pointed out, later on, when we would find the Dead Sea Scrolls, we would learn about all of these gospels that were written down as frozen text, as eyewitness occurrences, or as a very noble oral tradition that were simply left out because of the minds of a few straight white men. What a surprise! Shocker.
Mhm. Interesting.
But I do think that's interesting.
Interesting. So I see that this point of what is frozen and what is not is kind of debatable, kind of. But some things are for sure frozen, like the Lord's Prayer, which is recited the same way, like all over America, whatever, is frozen in America, or kind of thing, or the Pledge of Allegiance or whatever, or allegiance or whatever. That's said the same way, or even in AA, the 12 steps that
Every
are said
time,
the exact same way.
every time.
That is more of a frozen text than even a source text. But you could make the case that where this came from is a frozen-ish text more than a spoken text or something.
Hmm. I like that phrase, frozen-ish text, because we don't know. We do again, most of what we have has been lost to history or is very like sort of fragmented. And so,
Yeah. Okay, so third. Also with that frozen-ish text, I feel like that the context or the ability for this uh honoring what Dana's saying is that there's some parts that are missing, got lost in history. There's some cultural context that's missing, and that allows for a fluidity to go on with the frozen-ish part of it. And I do believe and I feel strongly that there is a frozen part to it. The frozen-ish is, we have to give that fluidity to that is possibility of things being gone in history and culture and things like that. And some not are not fully frozen at all. So that's the beauty of, you know, of manuscripts.
hmm hmm
And the oral tradition
hmm
and then the manuscripts, there's a passing down of those things, and they have the same goal, which is to relay information. So that's my added comment there. And I think because this book was not meant to be written or read in just a frozen way, like just recited frozen without interpretation, maybe that's why it doesn't really qualify as a frozen text as we know it, right? Like the Lord's Prayer, you don't read and interpret it, you just read it like, word for word, or it's like, I don't know, it doesn't really have the same function as a frozen text. I mean, you know what
hmm
I mean?
hmm hmm
Oh. Okay, let's go back to the Star Spangled Banner. Okay, now I'm curious as to this question. Why can there be hundreds of translations of the Star Spangled Banner that are all correct, but you can have a wrong translation of the Star Spangled Banner? And what does that look like? How would you know it's wrong?
I'm very curious to hear Thorne's perspective on this, but I will just start us off by saying that English has probably more, I don't know, more, but English has so many false friends that oftentimes interpreters that maybe are new or anyway. A great example is take advantage of this sale today. Take advantage of it. This sale today at REI ends at midnight versus, oh, some scammers are taking advantage of deaf callers. That phrase, take advantage, has two wildly different meanings. And the signs are very different. But if you were just interpreting like real time simultaneously and you heard it and you didn't hear the rest of the sentence, you'd be like, which one? Which one? And so I think we see that with the fluidity of English, and it has again so many what we call false friends, words that we think mean something. It might mean the opposite. It might have several different meanings. I mean, we all know a sign to run, to run, to run, to run.
So for the
So I
viewers,
think
there's
that's
two
part of the
different
errors.
signs for it's take advantage in a good way and take advantage in a bad way. And then this
Yeah,
means your nose is running. This means you're running a race. They mean different things. Sorry.
right. And so like if you don't know what ramparts are, you might misinterpret that, right?
Okay.
That's just my first pass. But again, I'd love to hear what Thorne thinks on this.
Good thoughts, Dana. All right, Thorn. Well, I want to add to that since or speaking from my perspective is that there could be a broad range from 1 to 3D, like one dimensional to three dimensional. So like my perspective is that I feel like there's more flat translations and some would be more visual, right? So no offense to both of you. I know that you're both hearing, so I love you. But with the signing, it's very 5D actually, because we use all of our space or all of the space in the visual, and not only the visual spatial or body language, or yeah, there's spatial awareness. So there's more of freedom to move and to show that picture of that song,
Mhm.
so what my added additional comments are to this is that it's not only, for example, a, a person who's interpreting, there's not even just a variety of people. There could be a black
Mhm.
person, a deaf person. There could be different interpreters in expressions. There could be a white person or a light-skinned person.
Mhm.
And those could be different signers. And then there's also cultural effect. Some people that there's a cultural effect of their viewpoint that's offered to the song. And at the same time, I think the goal is to make a picture
Mhm.
of the expression. So it's very possible that, the deaf person who's black, a deaf black person, might add their own kind of wave or accent to it, and, inflection with that they're signing. And then it's a little bit different than the light-skinned white person. Um, and so that shows that there's a rich kind of diversity going on and complexity with the signs. But most hearing people assume that, oh, there's only one way and how to represent or how to sign something. There's not, but there's a variety of ways. So I feel that there's an
Mhm.
overlap of where the spoken hearing culture and the deaf culture, which is kind of visual, overlap. And there's a bridge between those two of how to really get the point of expression of the song and the idea and the concept. And you have to understand that the interpretation is, if the interpreter's deaf, there's a lot of different variety there, but those can parallel with the hearing person who's speaking and translating it as well, but it might not be exactly the same. Um, because the sign has its own special way of expressing itself. So, hearing people can't copy that. So, so yeah, I hope that helps you answer a question.
Yeah, I mean, tremendously. I just want to add to that again. I really love that you brought in the cultural aspect because for us as especially as people that are, I personally identify as white. Um, there is a special significance to having a black deaf or a black hearing interpreter doing our national anthem. We as white people need to honor and recognize that that is it's so important, and that they are bringing their lived experiences with racism and slavery and everyday racism to this stadium, and bringing this access that is just it's a very complicated part that just really caught my attention, that I just wanted to honor that moment there, that there is a lot of backstory to a Black person showing up to sign the national anthem. So I did just want to acknowledge that. Thank you for your patience with me on that. There's also the language itself. So frozen texts are kind of notorious for being really old English, right? So, oh, say, can you see? Does not mean, oh, say, can you see? It's a calling, right? It's very formal, archaic language that serves as a calling. Modern, we might be like, listen up, everyone, get out of your chairs, listen up. It's not word for word static, and so it's also important that the interpreter understand how the translation would need to flow, and then, like Thorne said, how to make that a 3D picture. So I think that's also part of the conundrum.
Sure. And also, that reminds me with that Old English, that piece, it's not only that there's a language, it has a lot of uh, colonial influence, um, in that, you know, sentence. So, there's indigenous or black and brown and BIPOC people, and there's natural language there, and that's, that can be gone. Like, where's the English, you know, colonized there? And so now part of our history is to where our country is now is that we're trying to understand the language with how to decolonize, uh,
Absolutely.
and how to, you know, unentrench that, and kind of from, so that the cultural language can shine, and we can uproot that, and, kind of show that, so that into equivalent. I hope that I added something. Okay, well, my translation, because there's actually thousands and millions of translations of the Star Spangled Banner, because there's new interpreters all over the US practicing it in their school, and there's like millions of them. Okay, whatever. But my translation for the first sentence is green eggs and ham are good. Is that right? I mean, there's millions of translations, and so I must be able to do my own. Is that right or is that wrong?
Lauren, you want to go first?
Dana, you go first.
So, will the audience understand it? I understand. I understand you, Andy. Andy, what is your name sign again? It's
Andy, Andy.
Andy. Thank you. My apologies. It Our first intention always is, will the audience understand it? I prepped for a back Backstreet Boys show, so pop music. I did my translations. I got up there. I was interpreting. The audience all wanted a direct English translation, so I stopped my interpreting, and I knew they understood me, but what they were signing was not what I was signing, and so my job is to match them so they are understanding and rocking out and having the best time. So if your audience will understand green eggs and ham, great, because that's the real goal, right? Like, the three of us could quibble for days and days and years about a translation, a decision, a sign, but the ultimate goal is the audience going to get it, yes or no? That's my take. I don't know, Thorne, what do you think?
Oh, I so disagree with that. Okay.
Yeah.
I would add to that I feel that since I am a Gemini, I would say there's two sides to
Two
it.
sides, two sides, two sides.
The first side is that the audience is, their understanding and perception in their way, and, what they understand is there's information, there's translated here, and then there's also the interpreter and the person who's translating. And so, what is their goal with this? Is it just for themselves or is it for the whole audience, the public? So if it's a public arena, that means that they have to think about this and how they can code switch. And you have to understand, for our audience to understand the word code switch, it means to transfer between two different linguistic frameworks or cultures or things like that. It's two different contexts. So anyway, um, so but you have to understand also that there's an understanding of who the audience is. If the audience are all deaf, that means that the interpreter has to, a specific way, they have to match them. And if the audience is mixing and they're hearing and deaf, then it means that they would have a different way to rock out with that, so um it must be this. So it's not just about the audience and matching them, but for general people who are watching this, The role of the interpreter is always, it has to be to match the audience or match the client or the linguistics, or it's not about the client or the audience. They have to match the. I so disagree. Like you have to adhere to the text. You can't just be like, I just do whatever matches the audience. You have to
No,
follow
no,
the
no.
text.
No. I apologize. I might have misexplained myself. So what I mean is if you say I am the interpreter and my decision today is when I hear, oh, say, can you see, I will sign green, eggs, and ham. And you ask me, like, do you think that's a good interpretation? I will say no, because that's not what the English means. You're not building me a picture with those sign choices to help me understand what the rest of everyone else is getting from this particular song. That's my point. Is first, yes, you have to be loyal to the text, then you can make your interpretation. But you also have to be ready because sometimes your interpretation might not match the audience or the consumer. And then you got to, with sort of like code switch again. But yes, Andy, I agree. Yes. Follow the text, but you can't make up an interpretation that doesn't both follow the text and make sense, you know? Does that make sense?
I agree with you. You have to look at the function. Like, for example, if I'm doing a very like conceptual version that's like,
Mm-hmm.
not following the frozen English part of it, then the audience can't participate. Maybe the function of a frozen text is for people to sign along exactly to follow, like the Lord's Prayer. If you say that, people are supposed to follow and be like, God in heaven, hallowed
Yes,
be thy
yes.
name. And if you don't sign it in frozen order, they can't sign with you, which is part of the function of the text or something.
So this is Dana. Also, we have to remember that frozen text also exists because of our very long history of illiteracy, people not being able to read. So you would go to church and the father would say every time, Our Father who art in heaven, and everybody could follow along. So that's really a form of access. It's a very ancient form of access for all different types of communities, regardless of literacy.
Sure. And also, it's not only that, but related to the context and access. And, there's a long history here of unwritten, it's of what's the word? Like they said, illiteracy, like Dana said. Um, sorry, my hand wasn't cooperating there. So I can't write that or read that. So or they couldn't. So anyway, backing up also with the history of indigenous cultures, where they had a hand talk. They had something called hand talk. Um, hand talk. Uh, that's their kind of invented method of communication, with language. So it's a long history of that. And so you have to understand that hand talk also contributed to sign language that we know of today. So the root of where many of those contributed till today, I mean, there's a root there. So you have to look with the frozen text and non-frozen text and how to transfer between those. And I think there's something that happens, and I think it's fascinating because, forever I mean, we could talk about this forever until the cows come home. That's a hearing phrase. So we could talk about this, and discuss this for sure. But at the same time, I want to say that I appreciate this because I feel that this is allowing more of uh, the people to understand and understand these. It's just a 1D space. There's just a lot of diversity going on. So, I want to say thank you to Andy for opening up this space for this conversation. So I want to say thank you. Yeah. Dina, are you upset that I disagreed with you?
Never. I love a scholarly discourse. And that means often disagreeing, right? It's very Socratic, right?
Yes.
You ask me a question, I ask you a question back. I never just answer. I'm always probing you to keep getting to that meat. And so, no, I love it. I love disagreeing.
Okay, Thorn.
Thorn.
And that's part of how Dana and I originally connected was through discussing I can't remember that one night we went out a long time ago, many years ago. And I did mention, I said, "Oh yeah, I studied Kant and Kierkegaard and all these things in college." And Dana was like jaw dropped and was just like, "You read those?" And I'm like, yes, I did." And and that was a jaw dropper for Dana. Because I never thought they never thought a deaf person, or he never thought a deaf person would be willing to have that privilege to have that kind of education. And I do feel privileged in that case. So um for me to be able to give Dana that understanding that deaf people do have the skills to discourse and discussing, that was my honor. And I always appreciate those kind of haggling back and forth. It's so fun. It's always fun. Okay,
Huge,
back to you,
huge
Andy.
moment for me too.
Okay. Well, okay, so I think what I'm trying the point I'm trying to kind of get at with the Socratic method here is that in any text, like Vedic Valens included, right? We can have many different translations. Like the Riley translation that's online and free and available everywhere. That's a correct translation, right? And the Moira Press translation is a correct translation. I mean, it's been critiqued. People called it crazy that there's added stuff, and we can get to that in future episodes if we have time. But the thing is I think the heart of today's discussion is, why can there be many different correct translations, but how do you know when it's incorrect? So if people are saying this translation is crazy, it's not real, there's added stuff, how do we know if it's wrong? So I really want us to delve more deeply into the wrongness of translations.
This is Dana. I don't want to go off from your intention, Andy, but the first thing that comes to my mind is poetry. So there's a Sufi poet named Rumi, um, and his most famous translator is a man named uh, Coleman Barks. And the reason he's the most famous is because his translation of the poems seemed to be not only the most accurate to Rumi's native language, but they're also the most moving. And so, is that an indicator of accuracy? That the poems feel sort of static in other translators' mouths, so to say. But Coleman Barks, you read his translation and the poems just pop. So, is that an indicator? I don't know. It's a question for you
Well, man,
guys.
that's a beautiful, and we call that affect in sign language,
Affect. Yes,
right?
well
It's
said. Well said.
affect. So it's like
Yes.
if we get the emotions of the person that we're interpreting for and the tone of voice and everything, that's a good translation, right? Like
Amen.
we get the concepts out, but it's in the wrong emotion or tone.
And,
That is
and
an
Tom could
error.
speak to this. It's flat. Yes, and it is an error and it feels flat. It feels static.
Yeah, and I would say the Riley translation feels flat to me, and that is an
Mm-hmm.
affect error because Vedas Founds is very interesting. Okay, Thorn. I would say that Riley, his translation is more, it's free on online and it's available and it's open source. And in that way, that's cool, right? That's cool because it's accessible. But at the same time, the general tone of it or the context of it, like you were both saying, the emotional anality of it, the feeling of it, the feeling and expression of it is sometimes it feels flat in some ways, but it's not like boring. No, but it's more of like where it's like, okay, I can feel that this is a professor and or like this is some kind of recitation. I need a break. And then I go back to it and read it more later. But whereas the Vedic Valence, it's very dynamic actually. And the tone and the manuscript and how it is written is it flows in a
Mm,
way of where the feeling, the emotionality is right there. So it's visceral. You can feel it, and that connection, uh, you can feel it. It's not only mental, but it's also a heartfelt connection. And you can say, yes, yes, you know. So again, I think people who they have their different, um, you know, differences, and you can say this is the right translation for them, and a different person could say like, no, this is the right translation for me. And so I think the where it's wrong is I can say there's an indicator of wrongness if in some ways there's it doesn't show the tone or the translation doesn't show that culture or the understanding of that original author. Uh, so in this case, I would say that Vedi's Valens it checks off all the boxes.
mm,
You know,
mm,
it's beautiful. And you know, and the reason I say that is because Andy did all the research and all the work to really put everything in there like a map.
mhm.
And Riley, it's yeah, it has it, you know, he has it, you know, there's value to it, but at the same time, I can vouch for that because I personally know Andy, so I can trust her knowledge of you know working with that. So um it's not because I'm biased. No. It's
No,
just
no, no.
because of my experience with that connection.
Um,
Yeah, do you want to
hmm.
add something?
Yeah, I do. So this is Dana speaking, and I think that if you want like a quality translation, ask an ASL interpreter. Doesn't matter the language, doesn't matter the content, because we are trained to see everything through this lens of culture, lived experience, target audience. And so I know like Andy did do so much deep diving into and understanding all those different sort of facets and bringing that to the work itself, to the manuscript. So I'm really grateful for that.
Well, it was the sign language interpreters who helped me when I got stuck on the translation. You know, there have been many teams on the translation. So in Project Hindsight was the
Mm-hmm.
first place that did translations of video sounds, and like bless their heart, honor to them. They did awesome, right? And they had a team, they had astrologers on the team testing, you know, the math and all that kind of stuff. But our team was sign language interpreters, you know, and so when we got stuck on the translation, I would ask all my friends, like, what do you think I should do here? And you know, I think someone spilled coffee on the papyrus here. I don't understand. What should I do?
Yeah.
You know, and so the ASL interpreters were the team that I went to during that process. And so we can look at this text and say, oh, there's added information or there's this, but you can say a team of people really looked into creating a translation of that, you know, that had the right tone and
Yes.
affect and mood and feeling of Vedias Valens. So and I think if we went through the kind of particulars of the text, I could make a case that our translation is also more accessible to the reader because of many. I mean, I don't know if we did a comparison like I just taught book 3 to my students on Monday night, and we read the Riley translation first, and they were kind of scratching their head. I don't understand this method and I don't understand the technique. And then we read, you know, the Moira Press version, and they were like, oh, I understand the technique. And we're like, I'm not saying like kudos to myself, but I'm saying for
No.
all those years I got called crazy, it's like I'm a little bit like seriously, you're welcome. I translated the book for you. You know what I mean? Like not to be an
It,
jerk,
I
but
I was I was all up in that ancient Greek.
yeah, right.
um, um, I'm gonna steal real quick. No, I'm not. No, it's gone. Damn it. Damn it. Okay, good. So I'm sorry.
All right. Okay, I just want to make sure that you don't forget your point though. But anyway, I would say that the point with the Moira Press translation and the Riley translation is yes, there are some differences. and why it, reflects on the process of research and how the process of translating happens for sure. And it doesn't mean that it's, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not necessarily wrong, you know. It's okay to critique. That's okay to analyze for sure. Because of how that's how we learn. And how can we learn if we don't have that, possibility to analyze and take a step back and observe it. And at the same time idea, it's the same idea with language, because language is very dynamic. And it's always evolving. It's the same idea of sign language, it's always evolving. So there's always these parallels of spoken and sign language. So the bottom line is that I would say that the only time when there's an indicator for a wrong translation and where it's way off the point, it's too far from the note or the culture or the tone or the culture, sorry. And or the intention, and that's what I would say. Yeah, I don't think Riley did a green eggs and ham on Vedic Valens. I think he did a correct translation. You know what I mean? And I want to say
Right.
thank you to Riley, because now the astrologers can really play with the different translations and have two to compare, which is awesome, right? Like the Bible has like a myriad, and like we should have more.
Yes.
And so I think comparing many is a good thing. Sorry.
Always, always. We always, just like we always benefit as a species from diversity, we always benefit from a dialogue, and that includes comparing and contrasting. My point that did come back is um, math. How many people struggled with math until they met that one teacher who unlocked it? And it's the same. Math could be considered, I know it's not a frozen text because of higher mathematical concepts and things, but like basic, like elementary school math almost functions like a frozen text, right? You can add, subtract, multiply, or divide. I did that backwards. But for so many people, that part is locked until that one person, that one translator of math is able to be like, no, it's like this. And the kid goes, oh. And so we often get stuck on language because we're all big nerds, but like math just came to me, and that like Andy made it accessible and enjoyable. So yeah, that's just cool. Anyway.
Yeah. And the only reason I even say anything is because I was critiqued for 15 years and called crazy. Like I have a little bit of resentment about that. So it's like that's the only reason I'm like, oh, it's like sour grapes. No, not really, but I'm just kind of like defending myself. Okay, Thornton. Yeah, but also I think that uh the reason why the original Betty Fallon's book uh was critiqued is because yours was breaking through. It broke open for people like the astrology community, because they were used to this one, or used to, what they already had there. So they're kind of used to it. And that was a habit. And in your book opened up a whole different perspective. And so I think that is what caused that space for some people to say, oh no, and then kind of haggle over it. And then the other people are like, oh yes, and then they were jumping up and down and got really into it. And so I think there's that both of those happened. And I think that people like us who have that role of offering something, that will open up the minds of people or the hearts of people, or the souls of people, that is, that's where it comes to the space where we experience that critique. But at the same time, it's about, where, that's where it happens. It is inevitable. So,
Mhm.
the actual thing, that benefits us is how we can use that critique, and how do we offer growth, and how do we offer more expansion with that. So just putting that out there.
This is Dana, and I will add that something that we often comes up for us in our discussions is when we are making interpretations, when we are making analysis, is who is our audience, meaning how can we open that door wider? You're opening the door. We've talked about this before. Andy's done a wonderful job of making that door wider and wider. But again, I think it's really important to always be cognizant that for any translation, for any work or art that's put out in the world, how can we help the most people benefit from it if that's what they need? So I just always like to throw that out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the next wave of kind of Hellenistic astrologers could
Mm-hmm.
be those young people who now compare the different
Yes,
translations. Really,
yes,
there hasn't been a lot of time to do that because people have been really studying that rather than one that's accessible and it's open, open source, which will be the most ubiquitous of all because it's
yes.
open source. So I think people have been studying that and now it's time for a comparison. So I think the next generation could take on that, task.
I completely agree. Yeah, and again, let's get new voices looking at these ancient texts and getting those new perspectives and those new experiences onto these, again, ancient, like just gems of wisdom. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I'm curious. Okay, Thorn. And not only that, but also bringing in the new, you know, there could be a group, not only that, but also building that continuing bridge of, intergenerational sharing and information and, of where we have our, um, what we have, they can learn from that and keep trading because I notice that especially with America, there's still a huge ageism that happens,
Yes,
um,
yes,
the schism where
yeah.
the older and the younger still break, and that's the way that it would be cool to really continue building the bridge, an intergenerational bridge, and make sure that it continues to grow.
Always for building bridges, especially when you were speaking, Thorn, about indigenous people. If they were to analyze this text, this various, would they be able to say, "Oh, our culture, our history has a similar astrology viewpoint on the taste of the planet," or I mean, there's just a wealth of knowledge that we just haven't untapped yet. So I'm very excited for this.
Okay, so Dana, I have a question for you. Okay.
Hmm.
This sounds like I'm very narcissistic on this episode, but I'm like out for vindication. Okay.
Bring
So,
it, girl.
in
Bring it.
my interpretation of Thorne's signed words today,
Did you see me doing
for,
beautiful
for
several
the
times? That was
last
for you.
hour, how many times did you notice a wrong translation?
I so
What
for
percent?
accuracy, for accuracy as an interpreter, I was not doing a match for match. But several times, if you go back and watch this video, you'll see me do beautiful and maybe like mouth your name. And that's because like your translation voicing, your register, your vocabulary choice, your pacing it's like chef's kiss, 100%. Like chef's kiss on my end. I was like, holy fuck, I gotta start voicing again.
So there was one point where I stopped in my mind and was like, oh, I wonder what Dana would have done for that one. It was when Thorne was like hitting their hand, and I said, oh, my hand's not cooperating with me right now.
Yeah, he did the puh puh.
Yeah. And I was
Yeah.
thinking, what would Dana have said for that one right now?
I don't even know. And again, that's the beauty, right? Is
Like we
what
would
would have
have had
come,
different translations of that.
and regardless of what I could offer, my organic response will never know, right?
Right.
Because I wasn't in the moment in the hot seat. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, go back and watch me be like,
No, I just think it's like it's just an interesting thing of just like rightness or wrongness. Okay, Thorne. When I want to add to that, just putting this out there because the two of you know me in different contexts and some similar contexts. But I have both a personal and work relationship with both of you. And the two of us we've all worked together in different contexts for interpreting and voice interpreting. You guys have voice interpreted for me. So I feel that both of you know and have experience in different ways how to match me. And I would not be here if I didn't feel that way. So I do support that. So anyway, Well, you're very easy to work with, Thorn.
Yeah, Thorn, you're really fun to voice for.
Yeah.
Like I can really let my freak high register vocab fly like when I voice with you, man. I'm just like, it is erroneous to assume
Just like huge words. I know
egregiously.
the
Yeah, it's like cat ta $10 words. I'm like, fucking bring it, man.
Gemini power.
Gemini power, man. Virgo interpreter, Gemini power.
Nice. All right. Well, we're at the end of our time, sadly. This was
Holy
such a great
shit.
conversation.
Time pow.
All right. Well, Dana, thank you so much. You know, you'll be hearing from me in the mail.
Friends.
Some thank you,
Yes.
love.
Friends, thank you. Thank you. Love your eyes, love your hearts, love your time, love your brains. Thank you. Love your souls.
All
All
right.
right. Be well, everyone.
All right. Love you.
Take
Bye.
care.